So welcome everyone. We are going to give a little talk on what is Web3. Okay. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Bill Laboon. I'm the head of education and grants at Web3 Foundation. So a very relevant title for teaching people about what Web3 is, right? So I think when most people hear about Web3, they expect that this is going to be a talk about blockchains. Right? When you hear Web3, you think, oh, right, yeah, all that cryptocurrency, all that blockchain stuff, right? But when you think about a blockchain, all it is a data structure, right? And I don't know about you, I don't get super excited coming into work every day because I'm really amazed by a spicy linked list, right? Or an array, or a hash map. Right? No, I'm here for something bigger, right? And while blockchains obviously are a very important part of the vision of Web3, they're just a part. The vision of Web3 is a fundamental change in how parties interact, right? It is meant to be, and I feel this word has been overused quite a bit, but it really is meant as a revolution, right? A revolution in the way that parties interact. And blockchains, again, are a very valuable way of doing that, right? Obviously, they have made some changes, but I don't know how many people, right? Again, they get up in the morning and they're like, wow, hash pointers. Partial pre-image hash solving. Like this is just my life. This is why everyone is here, because they're super interested in data structures. So what is it, right? When we say like a fundamental change in how parties interact, so we're going to subdivide this down a little bit more. Right? And just as sort of a side note is probably the wrong word, but a reference, an end note for you to continue on your journey of learning more about sort of the philosophy of Web3. This is really based on an article that Gav wrote 8 years ago. It's still online. Just do a search for DAPS Gavin Wood 2014, where he defined Web3. And he came up with some ideas that I think are still extremely relevant today. Right? So when we say about what Web3 is, we really mean a few different aspects of this concept of changing the way that people communicate and interact with each other. Okay? The first is that we have some way for people to interact and decide and communicate in a way that is mathematically provable, right? That we don't depend upon some sort of subjectivity, right? We don't have someone who's deciding whether or not this transaction should go through or not. There are rules on the transactions that mathematically cannot be cheated. We want a way to keep secret that which we want to keep secret, and conversely, a way to publish that which we want to make public. Right? And finally, a way to agree on truth. Or in a sort of technical version of that is really a canonical history. What actually happened and what can we all agree on what happened? So we'll talk about each of these in turn, right? And sort of the technologies that are being used for helping these come to fruition. But the most important thing about all of these in the context of a Web3 vision is that it is not dependent upon a centralized entity. It'd be very simple for me, go back for a second, to come up with a single centralized entity where I say, all right, I am going to make Bill.com, right? And Bill.com, I will let you have private messaging with people. I will let you prove that you can ask, anyone can ask me that you did this thing at this time, or you did this thing at this time, or that you published something or not. But then you're really dependent just on me, right? You're dependent on Bill. And I like to think of myself as a trustworthy guy, but none of you should be trusting me, right? None of you should be trusting any one particular person. We need to come up with a way for us to communicate, to have these interactions without being dependent on a centralized entity. That's our goal. That's what we're all here for. We're here to decentralize, right? We're not here because of a data structure, no matter how important that data structure is, right? That data structure is a tool for us to meet this vision. So at Web3 Foundation, we have sort of like fundamental tenets of what we believe. So you've probably seen that, maybe if you've worked in the corporate world, you've had those like, here are our list of values, and they all are like the same 5 values, just written in slightly different ways, right, that are very generic. But at Web3 Foundation, we actually have, I think, some very specific tenets, and the first one of which is what we believe. It's almost like, for you Americans in the audience, if you remember the Pledge of Allegiance, right? And you sort of state, right, here are sort of things that we believe about our country. If you're not from America, it's kind of a weird ritual where every morning we get up and talk about how we pledge allegiance to a flag. It is kind of weird, but I think it is it's a good analogy here, right? With what we believe as being part of Web3, and we don't stand up every morning and pledge allegiance to Polkadot with our hands over our hearts. But there is a reason I am here. It's because I believe in these tenets. And we believe in a decentralized and fair internet, right? Where users control their data, their identity, their destiny. There's not a Bill Laboon or some Bill Laboon analog that's in charge of this. All of us are in charge, right? We as a community come to decisions on what the truth is. We as a community decide for each of us what is public, what is private, what we own. So another way of sort of putting this in even fewer words is if we think of Web 1, right? The old days of CERN, right? And the original websites, we could put something up online and everyone could read it. Then came Web 2 or Web 2.0, where not only could you read, but also write. You had those little like discus comments or Twitter or Facebook. You could interact and put your thoughts in. And Web 3, I think, is adding an own, right? You can own your data. You own what you're going to do, and you have the power over it. This also reminds me, for those of you who are Unix nerds, it's like whenever you're doing file access permissions, right? Your chmod, right? You've got read, you've got write, and you've got execute, right? But we have read, write, and own. So in other words, we've already gone from like a sentence to some paragraphs to 4 words. Less trust, more truth. Right? It says my like Superman. I was wearing the hoodie this whole time, so I could to do that. I bet I will be the only talk that you see today where someone rips, or at least slightly rips off their hoodie to show you their shirt. Right, so what do we mean by this? Right? Less trust, more truth. I get a lot, every time I give this talk to sort of like non-crypto people, they say, isn't trust a good thing, right? Don't you want to trust? But I think there's actually a better way of phrasing it. Anytime you bring your philosophy down to 4 words, you're going to lose a little nuance, right? So less required trust, right? I shouldn't have to decide who I trust. I can trust, in a sense, the blockchain. And I could build trust on top of that, right? There are people that I know on chain, right, that I interact with, or on Twitter, and I can see what they do on chain and prove that it's happened to them. That doesn't mean I can't also know them in real life and have additional trust on top of that. But this just gives us a good foundation for building this further trust. Right? So another analogy you could say, in the very, very old days when we were in sort of a Hobbesian, all against all state of nature, right? And you met some person on the road, and that person, whatever, had a knife or a club or something. It's going to be really hard for you to go up to that person and make friends, right? You're going to be a little bit afraid, you're going to be wary. It doesn't mean it can't happen, but it's more difficult. But nowadays, I'm here. I see lots of you. Maybe you have clubs in your backpacks. I don't know. Right? Hopefully not. But I'm not concerned, about that. We have, we have governments. We have, we have this whole system that we're living under that has some base level of trust, some small level of trust that we then can build upon. I can meet you, we can hang out, and we have more trust later. That would be much more difficult, again, if we were just living in the woods and I'm scared every time I meet someone. I'm scared for my survival. Right? So we have this awesome foundational level of trust that allows us to build even more trust on top of that. Right? And because of that, then we can get more truth, right? We don't have to spend so much time having to figure out every single transaction we see online, every single thing we see online, is it true or not, right? There are certain things that we can be relatively secure about in a Web3 world, right? We can verify that particular things have occurred, right, on chain, that a particular account has done something, etc. All right. But how do we do this? Right? So hopefully, this is just sort of the philosophy. This is the beginner track. So I apologize for yeah, Laboon, that's really old news. Okay, I've been a part of this for 13 years. I was referenced in the Satoshi's white paper. Like, okay. All right, that's fine. Maybe you're there. This is for the beginners. We needed to get the philosophy down. But hopefully, we all should be interested in how to do this. I think we can all agree we are not in a perfect Web3 world yet. Okay? Again, I don't care how long you've been in the ecosystem, right, or how much you've learned about this. Hopefully that is something that we can all agree on, that there is still room to grow. All right, so how do we do that? I think this is the question that we're all here for. So I think in order to answer that, we need to realize, as I sort of referenced a little bit earlier, Web3 is a lot more than just blockchain. Right? I probably should have put a Venn diagram here. I always think about these things as I'm giving the presentation, all right, what graphic should I have put up here? There's a lot more to it than just Substrate, right? And developing the blockchains. Encrypted messaging is Web3, right? Being able to interact with someone. Or cryptographic signing of data. PGP is Web3, right? Or GPG, I guess, nowadays. Distributed storage systems like IPFS, this is part of Web3. Self-sovereign identity is Web3. Peer-to-peer and mesh networks, distributed communications channels, and distributed computing. All of these things are a part of Web3, right? All of these are things that we can build upon. So all of these tools really go back to a few different things that we want to do, specific things that we want to do in a Web3 world, right? In a trustless way, in a way that we can keep secret what we want to keep secret and public what we want to keep public. We want to be able to statically publish things. We want to have dynamic messaging. We want to have trustless transactions, right? And we want to have some sort of integrated way of doing this. Nobody, hopefully, wants to just use subxt or issue raw extrinsics to a chain in order to do something, right? Just type in hexadecimal and send it off and someone else sees the hexadecimal. Or maybe you're really hardcore, you do it in binary, you just want to have a keyboard with a 0 and a 1, and that's all you want to do. But I would say that's still not really a Web3 world. A Web3 world is where all of this is integrated, where using blockchains or using Web3 technology is just like using Web2, or at least the equivalent of doing so. So when I look through the program today of these different things, right, that we want to do, I realize we have teams working on all of this, right? And we're going to hear actually from them today. So I want to talk about all of these different topics, and if you're interested in them, all right, here are the talks that you should go to. right? Because there are just so many interesting teams already working on projects here, right? That are meeting these specific needs, like these fundamental goals of Web3. So static content publication, in other words, this is just being able to put up a website, being able to put up content, being able to put up things that other people can read. Right? And if you stick around right after this talk, I believe in this exact same igloo. I don't know what this is. I want to say building, but it's inside another building, so I don't know. Whatever we're in, right? We have a talk on fighting censorship with Substrate Connect. Right? We have Fala a little bit later today giving a talk on launching a trusted setup. How can we trust, set up a zero-knowledge protocol, but how do we do a trusted setup for it? So dynamic messaging, well, we have Substrate giving a talk. Excuse me, not Substrate, SubSocial, pardon me. And they have their PolkaWorld project, which is an on-chain distributed. Wow, it's even hard to describe, right? It's like social networking plus, right? Having things done in communications done in a distributed way. We have a talk on building an oracle with ink. We have a talk, decentralized identity, right? Which is going to have a big part to play in dynamic messaging so that you know who you're interacting with. The Kilt talk is tomorrow. I'm not sure in which igloo it is. In Trustless Transactions, right? We have quite a few different talks coming up. In some sense, almost everything we do here is about trustless transactions. But I think something especially important to sort of pay attention to, and something that's been difficult, is cross-chain trusted transactions. So what we have seen historically when we want to communicate from chain A to chain B is like the classic bridge, right? However, we've also seen a lot of problems with these bridges, right? I'm not going to name any names, but how many bridges have been hacked in the last couple of months alone, right? You're quite a few. So I would definitely, if you're interested in how do we make a trustless transaction, and especially how do we do it cross-chain, any of the various XCM talks that will be going on. Gav was talking a little bit about it in his speech right before this. There are quite a few other ones happening over the next 2 days. So finally, an integrated user interface. We actually have 2 talks, one from Hydra DX and one from Talisman, both talking about how they are improving UI and UX in the Polkadot ecosystem. And they're sort of approaching it from 2 different angles. So please correct me if I'm wrong if anyone is here from either of those teams. But Hydra DX talking from more like the application perspective, right? Of like how they are making it easier for people to interact with them, how they are having their integrate better with workflows that people are used to. And Talisman, who have built a wallet, right? That is allowing people to interact more easily with not just Polkadot, but all of the various parachains in the ecosystem. So as we're going along and doing this, as you listen to these talks, I think something that's also important to keep in mind is that the technical advances, right, are one thing, and they are incredibly important. But it is also useful to keep in mind, strategically, what are we doing, what should we be doing, right, and how. So there is a lot to be improved in our ecosystem. There's a lot to be improved in any Web3 ecosystem, in any ecosystem, right? In any project, right? It's very rare that you have some project that was just made perfectly in 1982, and it's just been fine since then. I think Emacs and Vim may be the only examples of that, right? Of things that have, and I know even then they have changed. And I bias toward either side of that debate on which text editor to use. All right, so strategically, what kind of things should need to be improved? So from a scaling perspective, right, we want to make sure that it's possible for lots of people, anyone who wants to use this decentralizing technology, right? It really should not be something that is extremely expensive to use, or something that's incredibly difficult to use, or that's something that you need a PhD in computer science to use, right? We need to improve security, right? We want to eliminate issues which affect end users. We want to make sure that users have flexibility, right? That we can allow ordinary users to experiment and improve their own lives and take back their sovereignty, right? And finally, we want to ensure interoperability, right? We want to make sure that choosing some technology doesn't mean you are stuck forever in that technical stack. We've seen a lot of problems with this in Web 2, and hopefully we've learned our lesson, right? That people that wrote Facebook apps in 2006, and then in 2007 and 2008, Facebook said, all right, we don't want any more apps in our ecosystem, and now you can't use this, right? Or Apple saying, we don't want particular kinds of applications in our walled garden, et cetera. What I think would be really antithetical to the concept of Web3 is saying that, all right, we've developed this really awesome tool that lots of people are using, and there's absolutely no way to try some other way to do it or take your technology somewhere else. You need to use this, right? So these are all things that we know we need to improve, but I think we also need to keep in mind, as we're improving them, sort of the end user perspective, right? So does scale, if we can have lots and lots of transactions per second on a substrate-based chain, and we can have a lot of transactions per second on a substrate-based chain, right? But does it matter if people can't afford to use it, or they don't understand how to use it, or perhaps worst of all, they don't want to use it. They say, I don't like Polkadot, I don't like Substrate, I don't like blockchains. Blockchains are the tool of the devil. We don't want that. It's a big part, I think, of Web3 is having people trying to explain and convince people that yes, there are valuable benefits to using Web3. Right? If we want Web3 to take off, we need people to want to use it, and we want people to know how to use it. And security, so from a user perspective, does it matter how secure your protocol is if you got scammed or hacked? Right? I was again not going to name any names, but I was talking to someone at this conference, right? So hopefully we all have at least a pretty decent foundational understanding of blockchain technology, and this person accidentally signed the wrong message, and then their ETH account got wiped out, right? And rules of the protocol worked fine. Ethereum is perfectly secure. I'm not saying anything bad about Ethereum, right? But does that matter to this person who lost all of their ETH, all of their NFTs, all of their ERC20 tokens because they got confused about signing a message? Right? I think this is something we need to keep in mind when we talk about security, is that there's an end result to all of this. And I'm not saying it's easy that we just say, all right, let's set the Boolean variable, allow users to mess up equals, just change it to false, and then we're good, right? I understand it's difficult, but it really is something we should keep in mind as we're developing this. And flexibility, think, what do end users really want from a Web3 world? I just started playing with Dolly 2, and so this is that. If you haven't used it, it's super cool. You tell an AI what you want to draw, and it draws it for you, right? It's super cool. And I was showing this to my brother, and I spent literally 3 hours once talking with my brother about why blockchain is not a scam, right? And it took him about 3 seconds to realize, wow, Dolly 2, super cool, right? So I think we need to find a way to convince people, right? Very easily like that we can say and I think traditionally a lot of times what people have said is okay, number go up, and thus it's cool. But it really is so much more than that, right? And I think we need to come up a way to have people realize what they want, and so that they'll play with the Web3 tools, right? And finally, interoperability. And can we do this in a way that's safe, right, going from chain to chain, and sort of foolproof, in an easy to understand manner? I mean, XCM, super cool, super interesting. There's a lot you can do with it. It's also difficult to understand, right, as we just saw, right, from Gav's talk, right? So can we keep all of this in mind as we're developing, as you all are going out and developing Web3 tools? So we do have Substrate, which I'm sure you're going to hear a lot about it from, or you're already involved. I mean, this is the beginner track, but I assume most of you have at least heard of Substrate, or you wouldn't be at SubZero. As I mentioned, we have thought about all of these things, working with Substrate and developing it. We can scale, right, from a technical perspective. We do use best practices. We have shared security, right? You can connect to Polkadot if you develop a Substrate-based chain. You have a lot of flexibility, right, in choosing which parachain meets your needs or developing your own if there is no parachain that does exactly what you want to do. And of course, you have a lot of interoperability. You can use the same key pair on dozens, if not hundreds, of different chains. Okay. So we have Substrate, which is helping to bring about this Web3 world. Okay. But we can't do it all alone, right? So Web3 Foundation, our job here is to help you all go out and build Web3 applications, to build tools. And I would be remiss as in my role as head of education and grants if I did not tell you about the Web3 Foundation grants program. So if you are interested in building technology, the software, or even the hardware, we've had a few hardware grants, the Web3 Foundation grants program would be very happy to hear from you. We have accepted over 464 grant applications. We've actually received, I think, almost 1,000. I can't remember the exact number, but approximately 1,000. So about half have been accepted. 264 of those have finished. And we have given out a little over $13 million in grants since inception of the Modern Grants Program. So that's about 4 years, right? And we are actively looking for more people. If you are interested in building a project on Polkadot, we have an open process. So it's all on GitHub. You can follow along. You can review grant evaluations yourself and get KSM rewards, actually. So we do have grant evaluators at Web3, but the community also can do it. You can write RFPs if there's something that you would like to see in the ecosystem. You say, what? I don't know. We really need a wallet that also has a built-in alarm clock. I don't know. Write an RFP, a request for proposal, and you actually can get a reward for that, right? Our goal is to do things in as open, as decentralized a manner as possible. Figure out what people need and want in the Polkadot ecosystem and help bring it about. And that doesn't always mean that the same team that thinks up the idea will be the one to implement it. To learn more or apply, go to grants.web3foundation. Or if you really want, oops, I got a little out of sync here. There we go. If you want to do things in an entirely on-chain manner, or you're interested in building something that's not software, there's also the OnChain Treasury program. So both Polkadot and Kusama have on-chain treasuries. They have so far approved 367 proposals among them, of which 186 are already completed. And we've given out about 3.7 million DOT and 315,000 KSM to teams for building on in the Polkadot ecosystem. And the interesting thing about the on-chain treasury program, this doesn't have to be software. There are people that do podcasts and YouTube videos, and they've gotten on-chain treasury grants for that. There are people that have, there are people that have built their own chains. There are people that have done events, right? There's all kinds of things that you can get OnChain Treasury proposals accepted for. And it's just up to convincing the rest of the community that that's what they need. Right? And a lot of groups have already done this. And again, this also an entirely open process. The application, the selection, the voting, all of it is done on-chain. And if neither of these things specifically meet your goals, we also have other more specialized funding opportunities. So if you have a particular idea that you think doesn't fit into either one of these, or perhaps a really large idea that might be too big, that might require $20 million in funding or something, please feel free to talk to me. I cannot guarantee you that. Oh yeah, sure. I got $20 million bucks. Is the check okay? Right. But certainly, I'm happy to talk. We have teams at Parity and teams at Web3 that are involved in helping build this ecosystem. Because as I already said, our goal at Web3 Foundation is to bring about this vision of Web3 that I've just discussed, and we can't do it without you, right? So I'm asking you right now that you have heard my little spiel about what Web3 is, right? That you will help to build this world of less trust and more truth along with me. So thank you, everyone. Again, my name is Bill Laboon at Web3 Foundation. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or email. Really easy to remember, at Bill Laboon on Twitter or Bill at Web3 Foundation. Luckily, I have a pretty uncommon name, I guess. So if we have any questions, I'm happy to take them now. Yeah.
Do we have any questions? Hello? Oh, yes.
So this question ties to the initial principles that you mentioned, and also I think as a case, the NFTs that were discussed earlier, in terms of being able to take real world assets, represent them on the chain. And I think one question that arises that hasn't been brought up here or elsewhere is true privacy, true anonymity. The initial principle says the user will own and have ownership of their information, but almost none of this, as currently proposed, provides that anonymity. For example, in the US, ownership is allowed to be highly anonymous. I know that's not necessarily the case everywhere, but I know here in Europe, GDPR provides even stronger, stronger privacy aspects that are not covered, again, in these protocols. So what is Web3 going to do to provide those?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So I guess just to summarize really quickly for everyone else, that and just make sure that I understand I'm answering the right question, is that we talk about ownership, but generally by default things on the blockchain are entirely public. We can't have private ownership. So you are correct, and I would say this has not been a priority. And I think a simple ERC 721 style NFT, yes, that this particular account owns it. Now we can talk about just this is pseudonymity, right? Not anonymity. That accounts can have some sort of pseudonymity at least. But there actually are several projects out there, both in the Polkadot ecosystem and elsewhere, that allow you to have essentially a view key, right? You can tell that some account ose X, but you can't even tell which account does. But that account that does can prove using zero knowledge proofs that they say, all right, yes, I do own it, but they only have to show this to particular people. So please don't ask me to explain the math behind it. I just know this is a possible topic. I know that Zcash has this. Actually, NFTs have been built on top of Zcash. And I believe Fala, who is giving a talk here, is giving a discussion on this. So I guess the point is, this is possible. It's more difficult, and I would say it's a much more complicated process. But you certainly can have actual anonymity and not just privacy while owning NFTs, and only show that to the to whom you want to reveal it to. But again, I would talk to Fala about the specifics of how that works because I don't know the math well enough.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes.
One of the points you talked about was interoperability.
Yes.
And when we think about that, we usually think about digitally interoperable. But how about within real life? So can you own a house? Can an NFT really own a house? Can you, or that sort of thing? And is there, it seems something like an organization that Web3 could provide that legal link to the real world rather than just the technological link.
So yes, this is a really good question that gets delves deep into philosophy, right? Because what do we mean to own, right? You can't point to something and say, all right, there's an ownership, right? This is something that we as a society have agreed upon, right? Of like that because it's said, not to sound like an anarchist or anything, but like we say that because somewhere downtown there's a piece of paper that says Bill Laboon owns this house, that Bill goes there every day, that Bill Laboon actually owns this house. All right, so the question is, I think at like a really surface level, well, if we say that this paper can do it, why can't we say that a smart contract would do it? Or in this sense, yes. I mean, it's why couldn't it? It's no different really than the papers in a hall somewhere. But I think to sort of dig in a little deeper to this question. It's a very good question, by the way, right? You start getting into your really difficult questions about all right, what if the chain says you own something, right? But someone hacked your account, OXA743, public key, whatever, owns this house, and then all of a sudden, someone hacked your account. Now they got your seed phrase. All right, who really owns this? And I think this is a technical question that has solutions. I don't know what that solution is going to be, right? And it also, I think, has legal questions that I think are going to spend a long time hammering this out, right? Because not just we have to worry about the basic legal protections and legal concepts of ownership, and then we have to worry about it being worldwide. And I know that different countries, different cultures, different states, different cantons, they all have different opinions of ownership, right? And so I think what we're going to see, this is my prediction of the future, right, is some sort of agreement, right? Just as we saw a lot of different protocols, right, in the 70s and 80s. I remember that all right, well, there's Apple Talk over here, and this uses whatever coax, and this uses ETH-based, was it 10-base-T, and this is 10-base-2, and I can't even remember all of them now. And eventually we sort of figured out some way to get them all mushed together from at a protocol perspective and at least interact with each other, and we had some winners. And I think we're going to see something very similar, right? We already see this sort of supranational organizations, right? And not just the European Union, but also United Nations and the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, what's it, GATT? I forget what all it stands for. The concept of ownership is really difficult, and I think that in some senses Web3 makes it easier because we can say, right, that particular accounts own things. In some ways it makes it difficult, more difficult. And I think this is going to be a really complicated question but I think the concept of ownership is going to evolve.
Web3 Foundation will be involved in, or is that purely technical?
Well, I would say that this is certainly not a priority of Web3 Foundation at the moment. Our goal at Web3 Foundation is to build this decentralized internet. And I think that, one, we're not equipped, right, to then also come up with every single legal ramification, right, of this. And it may not even be a good idea for us to, right? Web3's goal, we're not meant to be we're in charge of Polkadot, right? It's meant to be we're helping to shepherd this. What ideally I would like to see is this, and this is just ideally what I would like to see, right? I'm not speaking on behalf of Web3 Foundation, I'm speaking on behalf of as a user, right, is the community evolve these things on their own, right? Just we've really been encouraging the community to be involved in building Polkadot standard proposals, our proposals for standardization of elements. We don't want to be the ones saying from on high, right, yes, ye shall do this. but rather like see the community and help, come up with these solutions and help have them come to an agreement on what are the next steps and what do they want to agree on.